Welcome to Books in the Freezer, a podcast dedicated to the deliciously disturbing world of horror fiction. I'm your host, Stephanie, and today we are getting existential with author Katherine Silva. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I am very excited to be here.
I am excited to be talking about this with you here. You brought this to my attention, and I'm like, yeah, this is a lot of horror. This is something we should talk about. And also, you mentioned books that I hadn't read yet, but I was very interested in reading. So I'm like,
Mhm.
yes, I actually need someone to convince me to read these. So I'm very glad you're here.
Well, you did the same for me. So I immediately went out and bought uh, two of them and then read them back to back. And it was a wonderful journey.
I love that. I was like, you absolutely did not have to do that, but I appreciate it.
Any excuse that I can go out and buy books is awesome with me. So
I feel
I
that.
loved it.
But you had a book come out this year, The Wild Fall. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Sure. The Wild Fall is the sequel to The Wild Dark, which came out in 2021. And it is all about an ex cop who has to survive an apocalyptic forest purgatory that's taking over the world while being haunted by the ghost of her dead partner. So there are definitely some existential horror, dread themes in both of these books. The sequel takes place 10 years after the original, and so it gets a little more dystopian in its flavor. And there's a lot of questions about what happens after we die, and in looking at it definitely in traditional Judeo-Christian themes, but also taking it to another place, getting a little more uh, cosmic horror with it.
Definitely. I mean, cosmic horror is a great place for existential dread.
Oh yes, yeah.
We were talking about this earlier because I feel like I know existential horror when I read it, but I feel like it's hard to describe. So, how would you describe it?
Um, so it really, I think the best definition I saw was actually on a Game Rant article, and it's talking about the horror that surrounds um, the realization of dying, or the fear surrounding what happens when we die, or
Mhm.
uh, the meaninglessness of existence. It's a cosmic gumbo, to use a
Yeah,
reference from from a wonderful TV show. Um, but yeah, it's definitely. I think that all should include the dread of the endlessness of existence, also, because that seems to be a fairly common uh, way to flip that genre on its head.
yeah. I'm like, there's a few things that come to mind with that, where, yeah, coming face to face with like the inherent meaninglessness of life and the horror of existence and mortality.
Hmm.
So, a lot. Do you feel like there was a pop culture like movie or a book that you read that like really you had an existential moment with?
Oh yeah, I it's so tough because like I think it was Annihilation, honestly. That one was just so different. Reading that book felt like my mind got blown wide open, and I haven't read the second or third books in the
I
series
haven't
yet.
either.
Um, but I remember just being like, what is happening?
I think yeah, it is interesting. I think too with like nihilistic properties where like I guess how it goes with it, whether it's like positive nihilism or like negative nihilism, where it's like where this is the end of the line, like human beings are it. Like we're done and it's now time for something else to take over. And there's kind of like a
Hmm.
positive, like, and that's fine. We did our
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah. I get that with a lot of things that are sort of surrounding nature themed. If
Hmm.
it's it's kind of like the Earth's time to come back and take over kind of thing, and that's okay. Humanity's had its time to shine, and now it's over. But your question just made me realize there was another pop culture thing that really got a lot of people heading towards this sort of fiction, and it was True Detective season 1.
Really.
um yeah, because there's a whole thing about the King in Yellow,
Hmm.
and talking about Lagadian horror, which is very similar to existential horror, and it's like life is meaningless. I would say that's probably the main point of it. And so a lot of people just started reading more Lagati, and then that brought up more existential horror, and then it kind of bounced back, I think.
Yeah. People were really into it for a while. It was on
Yes.
people's radar, at least in the pop culture zeitgeist.
Yep.
It's funny because I was thinking about this today, but a pop culture thing that I think actually helped me work through existential dread was 6 Feet Under,
Oh yeah.
where I was like, death is just a part of life. We all
Hmm.
die. These people, their whole life is death. And that's fine. And I felt so at peace.
Yeah, what a
Like it was,
great
yeah.
series.
But I just thought of that
um
today while prepping for this episode. I'm like, oh yeah, that was a moment for me.
Yeah, that and Dead Like Me is
I
another
haven't seen
one.
that.
Oh man. It's good. It's so witty. Yeah, when you can pair together that dark humor about death and make it work,
Yeah.
um yeah, just I recommend it anyway. It's good.
I was going to ask you, what do you like about it specifically? Like, what works about it for you?
Oh, the potential to come up with stories that are existential is just endless, and it can really glide into any subgenre. Like I've been doing a lot with grief horror. For whatever reason, I am just drawn to sad things. It fills my cup. And so I like writing about sad things, and the meaninglessness of life and sad things go together so well. So that's been my whole thing the last few years. But yeah, I there is just something innately interesting and something that's never satisfied about writing about death and what happens after it. Yeah, I don't really know where that interest started, but the problem now is that I just want to keep writing books about it.
Yeah.
There's no way for it to become stale though. It just there are so many ways to talk about it.
There are a lot of ways to go about it. And I also feel like as a reader, existential horror, those are the types of stories that when you're done, you flip it over, you're haunted by it. That is the horror that is like under your skin and you're just
Yeah.
like yikes.
Stays with you for sure.
I'm gonna stare at this wall and dissociate for a few minutes. Just really process all these
Mhm.
feelings I'm having. I think I've talked about this a few times on the podcast, but I mean, also like deconstructing from religion and Christianity and kind of
Mhm.
like that's something that's always been like, well, anyway, we don't have to worry about that. Do do do
Yeah.
do do until you're out of it and you're like, oh my god, I've never had to sit and think about this because it was always like, don't worry, taken care of. Do, do.
Mhm. Yep.
So yeah, these past couple years have had a lot of that.
Yeah. I grew up in a very like strict Methodist house, where we were expected to go to church every Sunday. Um, my dad is still staunchly Methodist, and at some point during my teens, I just like I got interested in it. I wanted to know more about it, but my interest in it stemmed from like watching Stigmata. And And then it definitely went in that direction, and I realized at that point I was just like, wow, I I don't have the same interest in this that you have in this.
Yeah.
Um and so since then, a lot of my I think a lot of my writing has been trying to come to terms with that, like,
Mhm.
this is really being used, I think, uh more for structure and emotional support
Yeah.
over here, and that's not, I don't need that the same way. But there are expectations still, so
Yeah.
that's that.
Yeah. My best friend growing up was Methodist, and I went to her church a few times. And I remember thinking it was like cool that they were Protestant, but still had like aesthetically a lot of Catholic stuff, like their priests wore robes. And I was like,
Yep.
that's kind of cool. Well, we were mentioned a few movies earlier. Do we want to get into some movies that deal with or feature or leave us
Yes.
with
Yes.
existential horror?
Definitely.
So we talked about Annihilation. Yeah, I'm with you. I really loved Annihilation. I think I tried to read Authority, I think is the next one. Um for work horror. Tonally, it was so different though. It was
Mm.
not like Annihilation at all. So did you say you read it or watched it or both?
I read it first and
Okay.
then I watched it, and very they're two very different stories. I mean, there are similarities, and I was almost annoyed at the movie at first because it did not follow the book as closely as I wanted. But then I grew to appreciate the film after some time.
I agree with you on that. Like there was some things where I'm like, but that's not what happens. But then I think there was some things that it did so well that I couldn't help
Hmm.
like it at the end. I wrote Coherence, which is a movie that I love. It is such a mind trip. It is these people having a dinner party and there's some kind of comet or meteor. You just watched it, right? So
Yes,
you might be
yeah.
able to tell me.
I believe it's a comet.
Yes, okay. And as far as they know, it like knocks their power out. And they go outside and like the whole street is dark except for one house. And I don't even know how much to get into because I don't want to spoil anything, but it is a trip.
I think what I really appreciated most about that movie is it doesn't feel very scripted. It feels so natural, like you're sitting down at this dinner party just watching it happen, and so you're immediately bonding with these characters because they feel real. Uh
Yes.
and so when everything does start getting crazy and trippy, uh it's harder to believe that somebody wrote this and directed this.
That is true. It does feel very natural. Like we are literally just observing a dinner party gone
Mhm.
wrong with escalating stakes and all kinds of laws of physics.
It's not found footage, but it's as close to found footage as you can get.
Hmm. And then you mentioned The Endless.
Yeah, I watched The Endless last night, and it's about these two brothers who have escaped a what they call a UFO death cult, that they were um, that they grew up in, and they're now going back to visit it. And it went a lot of places I was not expecting, and it definitely keeps a lot of things in the dark. Like you're, what's the best way to say this? It's like the horror is in the shadows, and you're not it's not all blood and guts and gore. It's just dread, and you feel that dread consistently throughout the movie, as these two brothers are returning to this place, and everybody there doesn't seem like they've aged. uh they're all just kind of going about their lives, ignoring the
Yeah,
outside world. It's, yeah, it's really spooky.
it is. I rewatched it um for this episode, but I had seen it a few years ago and absolutely loved it. And I love the dynamic between the brothers where the older brother like pulled the younger brother out, and they're having a hard time making it on their own, kind of in the outside world. Like they're having a hard
Hmm.
time keeping jobs, making ends meet. Um, and the little brother just has good memories
Hmm.
of being at the camp. You know, like we had food there, we had friends, we had all of our needs met. I don't know why you pulled us out and now we're struggling out here. And I don't know why you did what you did. And there's some resentment there.
And it's so easy to identify with uh Justin, I think, was the older brother, because he's kind of taking him back so he can be like, and now you're going
Yeah.
to see what it was like for real, and then we can just go home and like
Mhm.
everything will be fine. You won't have these lingering desires to return to be with
Yeah.
the camp. Um, so, and then the horror.
Yeah. Yeah, that it I was not expecting that the first time that I watched it. Highly recommend if people haven't seen it to check that out.
Yes.
Um, I put The Truman Show in here, which is not a horror movie per se,
It's,
but
but it's been a really long time since I've seen that one. And like, I think I was a kid when I saw that, and it has stayed with me for years because of how uncomfortable it was.
yeah.
The idea that like everything that you do, your entire existence is entertainment for other people,
Hmm.
and that, well, nothing is what it seems. No one's
Yeah.
genuine. It's, yeah.
That messed me up as a kid. I was like, what if all of my embarrassing moments are being telegraphed to the world right now and no one is having a real interaction with me?
Yeah.
These are all just
The
actors playing a part and they have like marks to hit. And
and
I'm
the
the only one that's
idea,
not in on it.
yeah, and the idea that the little things that you do that are kind of like a blip in your memory are highlights for a bunch
Hmm.
of people too. Like they're cataloging everything that you've ever done. It's recorded, it's there.
Do you think we're gonna? I mean, I think it's gonna be. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just had
No,
this.
it's fine.
I think we're gonna see that with the children of like mommy influencers in the next couple of years
Hmm.
as they grow older and realize like all of their milestones have been just content for people to watch.
Yeah, that is something that I'm just like, I'm so like, I don't have kids, but I do have uh friends who do, certainly, and I do see the levels
Mm-hmm.
of like how much they how many photos get put on the internet of their kids,
Mm-hmm.
versus like the occasional, oh, this was a really cute
Yeah,
moment. um and it is just like, god, how how is this person going to feel
I don't.
when
Yeah.
they, or is it going to be so natural at that point in their existence to just like have yourself on social media, have photos of yourself out there, because that's like how everybody communicates, that it's
Yeah.
not even going to matter. Um, yeah, no, it's definitely crossed my mind. And it's, again, uncomfortable. It's just an uncomfortable feeling.
I don't know. I was thinking, yeah, about people who have children of mommy influencers who have grown up in the spotlight and have strangers out there that have memories of them doing things that they don't remember, like before they could form
Yeah.
memories. Anyway.
Yeah, no, it's super valid to this conversation. And it is that is a horror story in the making.
Hmm.
So I did watch Possessor uh a couple days ago, and mainly because it came up as a suggestion to watch for existential dread. And it is about a woman who is like a hit woman,
Interesting.
um who works for this company that has this machinery that they use to possess other people,
Hmm.
in order to take out the hit on whoever their subject is. And what's really interesting about it is they went into, like, this woman has been doing this for years. She has a family that she has been kind of separated from, uh, because what happens with possessing people is, like, you do have the potential to lose yourself in their memories or in their personality. So every time she comes back from possessing somebody, they test her on these objects that are hers, and objects that are not hers, to make sure that she's, coming back to it all. And they show her returning home, and before she gets there, she kind of stands outside and practices her how she's going to talk to her son and her ex-husband, like, just to make it seem like she's has some emotion and has some, like, desire to be there, and that things are natural. But it's so creepy too, just to think, like, yeah, this person jumps into other people's consciousness and kills people, and then is expected to, like, keep it a secret and live their daily life. um
Mm-hmm.
and and then, the next hit goes out, and there is an issue with the compatibility between the two subjects, so things don't go as they are planned. There are definitely some very trippy scenes. It is directed by a Cronenberg, not the man himself, but I think one of the sons. So there's
Yeah.
definitely some body horror in there. Um, but it's really good. Definitely has some scenes of hyper violence that I was not expecting, and neither was my boyfriend. So that was pretty scary in the moment. But I definitely recommend it,
Ooh,
because
okay.
it was compelling.
I will have to check that out. This episode is brought to you by Fangoria, the world's best horror and cult film magazine since 1979. Listeners can use code BOOKSINTHEFreezer to get 20% off their order. That includes, of course, merchandise and first-time subscriptions and single issues of the magazine. Not only are there tons of articles and interviews about upcoming horror movies, there's a regular segment by Stephen Graham Jones all about slashers called Slasher Nation, so you're going to want a copy. So again, that is code Books in the Freezer, and thank you, Fangoria, for supporting the show. Should we talk about some books?
Yes.
All right, I can go first. And there was a movie I didn't mention because I am mentioning the book, and that is Under the Skin by Michelle Faber. Um, you said you had seen the movie.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
And it's a little different from the book too, right? Like I
A bit. I think it gets the main essence, but the book explains more,
okay.
you know. The movie is very like sparse, kind of minimal dialogue, but it gets the point. Um, so this is about a woman named Isserly who drives around Scotland picking up hitchhikers. Like in the movie, I don't think she's ever named, and I think in the credits her name is like Laura.
Hmm.
I did Patreon episodes with my friend Laura where we talked about the book and then we did episodes talking about the movie. So I feel like we had a lot of like fun
Nice.
facts that might pop up in here. Um, the book is told from her POV as she is driving around picking up these men, and we see that she has like a certain type that she is looking for. She is looking for like a tall, like muscular man, and she's also kind of looking for someone that doesn't have a lot of personal ties to the world. So she does prod like, "Oh, do you have a girlfriend at home waiting for you? Do you have
Hmm.
kids?" In the book, this is something that also doesn't make it in the movie, is that she's very strange looking. And I know in the movie they cast Scarlett Johansson, and
Hmm.
the first thing you don't think of is like strange looking. It's like, but she's described as having like a very odd face. She's very petite, like she can hardly look over the steering wheel, but she has like comically large breasts. Um, and she's just kind of an odd being, and like every kind of like man that comes in kind of notices that she's like something is off about
Hmm.
her. The book goes a lot more into what she is doing. The movie does hint that there are other people that are a part of this. You know, there's like beings and motorcycles that like ride around.
Hmm.
Um, but the book gets more into like, no, she kind of goes back and has to report to certain people, and there are like
Gotcha.
deadlines
Okay.
and things that need to be met. And like, there's a hierarchy and people answer to certain people, and you kind of see what happens to these men that she is picking up. It's hard to talk about this without giving the main twist away and like talk about it. And I will say I have beef with Eli Roth because of this, because I was watching his history of horror series and Under the Skin comes up and they just say what the twist is, and I
Oh,
hadn't seen it yet or read it, and I was so mad.
that
So
sucks.
I hold grudges. I am a Taurus. And so like since that moment I was like, damn it, Eli Roth. I hadn't seen it.
Yeah, that's
Um
not fair
yes.
at all.
No, so I went into the book kind of knowing what it was. But I don't know, she has such an interesting perspective is all I will say. And a lot of her POV is her musings on existence and humanity and being a human
Hmm.
and living and kind of doing this job and how she interacts with people. And a lot of it was actually very beautiful. She has like a lot of beautiful thoughts about she has a lot of thoughts about the beauty of the world. That was a book I really liked. Um
That's one I definitely need to add to my
I
list.
I recommend it. Um I mean, I also really love the movie. And I think I just saw that A24 is bringing a lot of their movies back to theaters, and I think Under the Skin is one of them. So they're gonna
That's awesome.
bring it back for a
God,
big screen
they make so many good
viewing.
films.
And they're one of the studios that's met all the WGA and SAG requirements. So kudos
Yes.
to them.
Hmm.
So Under the Skin, I would say, is a room temperature fridge book. It's one that did haunt me, but not in like a horror way. Like I definitely
Hmm.
thought about it for a few days. And I really liked it. I've thought about reading more Michelle Faber. It's funny. I always think about how Michelle Faber wrote Under the Skin, and he also wrote The Crimson Petal and the White, which is
Hmm.
the book that in Gilmore Girls that Emily Gilmore is reading on that episode where she's like super drunk because her mother-in-law died and she
Hmm.
discovered that her like mother-in-law hated her and so she's like in a robe Tennessee Williamsing it. I was like same author.
Hmm.
The impact, the
Yeah.
cultural impact. Anyway, off on a tangent there. That is Under the Skin by Michelle Faber. And if you would like to hear more of my thoughts on Under the Skin, like I said, there are several Patreon episodes all about it.
So I chose The Worm and His Kings by Haley Piper, which I am guilty to say that I have not read the sequel yet. Even The Worm Will Turn. It is supposed to be a trilogy, but I did read um, this one last year, and it was it headed in a direction I was wholly not expecting it to go, at all, and I fell in love with it. And it is about this homeless person who I believe is trans, and their girlfriend goes missing from their homeless community where they are. Um, and there's kind of the story of this creature that has been taking homeless people, uh, and so she ends up following them. I think the thing comes back and takes somebody else, and so she ends up following it down beneath the sewers and beneath like the tunnels in the city, uh, to where it's been like collecting people, and finds sort of a culty thing that's going on down there. And from there, it just gets stranger and stranger and scarier
Mhm.
and scarier. Um, but I think one of the most poignant things about that book is that there's a lot of parallels, talking about trans existence, how you're identifying, um, with also how the homeless identify in this city. Some have chosen that way of life because that is what they
Mhm.
would rather have, or that's what would be safer for them to have versus uh, being at home. And it opened a lot of uh, opened a lot of windows and made me question a lot of things. And I really appreciate when a book can make me do that. And Haley Piper is an incredible author.
Yeah.
Uh, so, and there were definitely moments in that book that were absolutely horrifying. Um, that I put up there in my like list of scary scenes
Yeah.
in books. So I do recommend that one and its sequel and the eventual third one that will come. That is The Worm and His Kings by Haley Piper.
Uh my next pick is Mr. Magic by Kirsten White. This was a book I was very excited about. I really like Kirsten White. I think the first thing I ever read by her was The Dark Descent of Elizabeth Frankenstein. But this is about former child stars that get together for a special podcast reunion about a children's show they used to be on called Mr. Magic. And we're following Val, who is kind of just like picked up by this group that kind of just like crash where she's at. And she goes with them and realizes she has no memories of what they are talking about or this show. And this show is very enigmatic. Like people talk about it, and you see snippets of there being an online community talking about it, but there are no clips that exist
Hmm.
of this. And if they do get uploaded, they get taken down immediately. Um, so a lot of people are very interested in this. So there's a lot of interest, of course, in this podcast reunion with these former child stars to, something that was nostalgic to a lot of people and part of their childhood. I really like this. I would say this is a good read alike if you've seen the first season of Channel Zero Candle Cove or read the creepypasta that it's based off, Candle Cove. It's very weird and liminal. And one thing I enjoyed about it was reading the author's note when I was done, where I felt like
Mm,
I was like, oh, that makes me like look back and frame the whole story very differently, which was interesting because I went into it thinking like, okay, it's definitely about this and this, and then reading her author's note and being like, oh no, but I can also see that. And now I'm going back and thinking like, okay, yeah, that does make sense that that would coincide with this. And I really liked it. And you said you read it too.
yeah. Yeah, I finished it very quickly last week. Um, yeah, that was as creepy as hell. I really enjoyed it. Um, I I did I was able to guess a few of the twists that were coming, but it was executed so well that I didn't care.
Yeah.
um, and I think the house that they go to is probably one of the creepiest settings in a book that I've read about in a long time, because it just there's something so fake about it, and so
Yeah.
like not it's not comforting at all, and it's not meant to be. And when it concerns like the idea that these people who were on a kids TV show are going back to like share their memories, you would assume that it would be a really like nurturing and nostalgic place they'd be going back to, something that would just like make them want to remember what happened. And it's just bare, and there's no doors on it. And it's just like it's
Yeah.
so ugh.
And as they start remembering stuff and really questioning like the types of songs and like morals that this show was pushing, and the fact that they were all kind of like forced into these different roles and
Hmm.
like who is who and why.
Yeah.
I would say for me, this was between room temperature and fridge. Like, I wouldn't say it's fully room temperature, but not like fully fridge. I will say it's like somewhere in between. And this is very like liminal creepy, so
Hmm.
in that space in between. So that is Mr. Magic by Kirsten White.
um my next book that I had on my list was The Vile Thing That We Created by Robert Atone. This one came out in April of this year, and I got to read it a little early because Rob is a good friend. And it was also one that turned itself on its head. You go into it expecting something, and you get something very different from it. And it starts with the idea that you've got these two, this young couple who really love just being in love and uh, existing by themselves, uh, and then realize that all of their friends have kids, and so they're kind of
Mm-hmm.
losing their friend circle, and they wonder like, oh, maybe we should have a kid too, maybe it's time for us to join that next stage in life. So they get pregnant, have a kid, and it is not a child that they were expecting in the slightest bit. And all kinds of crazy shit starts happening. And it I think the biggest existential part of this is concerning our main one of our main characters, and of course I'm gonna forget her name. He's gonna kill me. But uh but the woman in this pair is dealing with these feelings of like postpartum depression, and whether or not she actually wants this kid, if she's, making a big deal out of it for nothing. uh is everything that's happening really actually happening? um and how is that, how she's seeing things, is that breaking up their relationship? So it and then it twists again later, which I really appreciated. um but I won't say how. um but this is definitely one of those like slow burn books that really sticks with you. uh i I would put it at a room temperature to fridge, in terms of some of the horror. uh and I definitely recommend reading it as fast as you can because it's really good. And that is The Vile Thing We Created by Robert Atone.
This has been on my TBR for ever, and when you mentioned it, I'm like, I need to hear more about it.
Mhm.
Like, I've been interested in reading this, and I love the cover. Um, so I cannot wait to read this, and it sounds really good.
Yeah, it does a really good job of blending genres. I will say
Okay,
that. And the characters are
interesting.
really, really well fleshed out. So,
Hmm. Okay. All right. Well, my final pick is We Spread by Ian Reid. Although I could have picked any of several Ian Reid titles. I feel like he nails existential horror. I talk about I'm thinking of ending things probably too much. So but that could have fit nicely here. Also Foe, but I figured Foe is getting a movie, and so people are probably going to be picking it up in anticipation
mm,
for a movie. So I thought I would talk about his new release, We Spread, uh, which is the existential horror that is our aging bodies.
mhm,
So this follows Penny, an artist who has been living alone for some time until she has one too many incidents and gets sent to live at a living facility, which at first she's fine with. She really likes this facility. She finds herself like painting more and mostly getting along with the people there. But she notices that she's starting to lose track of time. Like there's just a lot of kind of weird, unexplained things going on. And she's just not sure if there's something more sinister going on. And this book is an experience because I don't know, I felt like even in the first part where she's in her apartment and she's telling us about like this life that she's lived in this apartment and kind of how like all it takes is just a few falls before like everything that was your life, like you can't live it anymore. Like you're betrayed by your own body, this vessel that's been like carrying you around and like living this life with you, and it's just going to start breaking down. And then when she goes into the facility, it's very like dreamlike. Like as a reader, you kind of never feel like you're like really anchored into what's going on. And it's kind of purposeful that way, that it's kind of
Mm-hmm.
like dreamy and like what is happening. Um and he just does that so well. And this book
Mm-hmm.
is such a fast read. Like when you look through it,
Oh
like the
yeah.
spacing and the small paragraphs, like this is a book I feel like you absorb. Like it just like you inhale this story. Um, but yes, the existential horror of like one day this vessel will betray me and eventually start breaking down and my mind will get slower and I will forget things and it's a lot.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot to
And
deal with.
also the like not doing all the things that you wanted to do before you get
Mhm.
there.
Yeah. Real happy stuff, it's good. Yeah, this one haunted me. But Ian Reed is the master of that. This to me was Fridge because it did scare me. It did give me a lot to think about and I recommend it. So that is We Spread by Ian Reed.
I just finished that one today. So
What
I
did you think?
I oh man. Like I am still my mind is still turning trying to figure out exactly like what is going on and not having a definite like answer is getting to me a
Mhm.
little bit. Um but it did go very fast. I
Yeah.
really appreciated the minimalism and uh the way it was laid out. I mean, it just yeah, I could have kept reading. That book could have been like this big, would not have
Yeah.
mattered. So my third read is You've Lost a Lot of Blood by Eric LaRocca. And I went into this one, I had read his first novella, um, The Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Spoke. So I kind of knew, I like had a feeling of how how it was going to read before I went in. I was not expecting the like dual storyline that happened in it, and I really liked it because it showed another dimension of this character's personality. Um, and really the big existential part of it is this character's story that they wrote that we get chapters of throughout the book, um, concerning this woman and her brother, and they're running from something and you have no idea what, uh, and they get to like a house where I think they're interviewing somebody, or it's something like that. Of course, I read this one also a few years ago, so my memory of it is terrible. But really, it's a guy who created a game.
Mhm.
They're at the house of this guy that created this virtual game, and what happens to them there is just like you don't see it coming. You don't see any of it coming, and it really really messed with me. A lot of the body horror really creeped me out and still creeps me out thinking about it. Um, and in the other story, the main story, um, is about these two lovers who murder people. um, for fun ish.
Mhm.
But but they have these very long eloquent conversations about why they kill. And it's, yeah, it's just, it's such a like mood novella. It
Yeah.
really speaks a lot to like to Eric's ability to write and his type of writing, which I think is fairly consistent throughout the books that he writes. And it's just so good and so creepy. And this one to me is a freezer book.
Wow.
Um, Mostly just for the, the creepy creep story in the middle. I definitely recommend reading this one, uh, for sure.
I haven't read this one. I moved last year and apparently I stuck this away in a box. So I found it like a few days ago as I was randomly in my garage, not specifically looking for this book, but I was just like
Hmm.
unpacking a random box and I'm like, I knew I put this book in here because I was like, I'll open this first.
Hmm.
And so I will have this book to read soon. It did not end up working out that way, but I have it again.
Nice, nice,
So I can read it now.
good.
It sounds
Um,
really good.
yeah, it's it makes me like I want to go back and read it again because I know that I missed a lot reading
Yeah.
it the first time. And then also just the story of getting this book. I went to Merrimack Valley Halloween Book Festival last year, and Eric LaRocca was there, but he was
Mhm.
not there the entire time, and he almost left before I could get him to sign one of my books, and before I could buy that book. And um, somebody like hailed his boyfriend and
Mhm.
got him to come back and sign it, and I was mortified but also really really happy. So that copy of that book does hold a special place in my heart for that reason too.
Oh, I love that. There was like a couple other books that I didn't quite want to put as picks, so I do put them in the like honorable mentions
Hmm.
category. Like I thought Interview with the Vampire fit in pretty well. I think vampires are a great vehicle for existential horror because you're looking at beings that suddenly, not suddenly, but have to deal with this like eternal life, and
Yep.
not everyone takes kindly to that. And I love that dichotomy between
Yep.
Louis and Lestat
Yep.
because Lestat loves it and is annoyed that Louis does not see this gift that was given
Hmm.
to him and doesn't want to party hardy and wants to be sad boohoo. I love Louis's musings on being stuck in this and the kind
Mm.
of torture that it is for him, and also the idea of Claudia, of
Yeah.
being perpetually a child, but like aging and maturing mentally, but always presenting as a child, which I know for Anne Rice, she was working through some stuff with like the loss of her daughter. So like her
Yeah.
daughter is forever going to be a certain age.
Yep.
And vampirism is an interesting way to explore that
Yeah.
grief and that loss. Um, instead of Scott Moses's Our Own Unique Affliction that came out this
Yep.
year, also like a good like existential vampires.
Nicole Eigener has one that's amazing too. Um, and it's basically it's about a vampire who's living his life backward. um,
Interesting.
and of course now I'm going to forget its name because I am a horrible person. Uh, but
That is not why.
I read it. It's a big book, and I read it last year, and it's so elegantly written. Um, and it now has a sequel, and it is called. I will get there. Beguiled by Night.
Oh, okay. I've seen this cover. I see the cover in my mind. Okay. Ooh, that sounds really interesting though. So I am
Mhm.
gonna have to pick it up. I'm adding so many books to my cart with this episode. um, I also thought House of Leaves. It's good
Yeah,
existential horror.
yeah. That one is so twisted,
Yeah.
but so like it makes you question everything. Uh
Mm-hmm.
and it's so interesting how it's done, like the entire format of that book, because I know people have tried to read it in Kindle format, and that's just like not the same. You have to have the physical book,
Mm-hmm.
um with all the different text colors and all the weird formatting and everything to really get the entire
Yeah.
vibe of being sucked into a black hole.
Yeah. A labyrinth under your house,
Mhm.
whatever.
Yep. I thought it was worth mentioning just
Yeah.
because of the parallel again to the True Detective thing where
Mm-hmm.
they were talking about life being meaningless, uh, and a lot of his work really does make you question things. And a short story I read recently, which is about I think it was a prisoner that psychiatrist was talking with, and the prisoner somehow gets out of his cell, even though it's supposed to be impossible. You know, he escapes, and but the whole time you're reading this, you're just like dropping down deeper and deeper into a rabbit hole, um, and it's making you feel more and more dread the further you go. And they keep talking about like, oh, and the daughter's upstairs asleep in her room, and like, and you're like, I know what's gonna happen. Like, don't don't do this to me. Like, uh, and that's what they all feel like.
That's funny. I mean, it sounds terrifying,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
what was that story?
Do not have the title of it,
Okay, it's all
but
good.
it's the first story in one of his collections.
Okay. He is not someone I've read from, and I knew people were going to be upset if he did not at least get mentioned in this episode. So I'm glad you were able to bring
Yeah,
some of
I
that.
do feel bad that I'm not doing it justice, because I've just started to read him, so
Mm-hmm.
I'm definitely not a scholar when it comes to Legati, um but it's, yeah, worth the mention.
Well, one of the traditions we have on this show is to talk about chilling obsessions or things we are enjoying in horror. So, have you been enjoying anything lately?
uh Two things, one of which is relatable to what we were just talking about before, which is that vampires are coming back. um
Woo!
because there was definitely a stage where vampires were kind of old and tired, in the paranormal romance. A lot of paranormal romance with vampires came out, and that got a little bit uh, overblown. But now we are getting more of that uh, horror vampire, more of that like the existential dread vampire,
Yeah.
and it's being done in some really creative, beautiful ways. Um, like Nicole Eisner and Beverly Lee have a whole series going
Yeah.
together, which they started separately and have now combined. And
Really?
yes, and
Okay.
it's really cool.
Because I
Um,
started the first of Beverly Lee's of the Gabriel Davenport,
yeah,
right? Series. Yeah.
I think so. That series does have like its own conclusion, and then you've
Hmm.
got Beguiled by Night, and then there is a like novella that takes place that connects the two.
Interesting. Okay.
uh and then you go to the sequel of Beguiled by Night, and then there's another sequel, and then they wrote a novel together. So
Oh,
it's,
wow.
yeah, it's a huge collaboration, and it's really awesome. um and I look at it and I'm just like so in awe, because I have never, I don't think I could ever collaborate with another writer to write something, because I'm just so like, it needs to be this way and I need to
Yeah.
do it, this way. Um,
Yeah.
so the fact that they have this whole universe together is insane. Um, and
Oh,
then
wow.
also the, is it Our Own Unique Affliction? Is that the,
I think
yeah,
so.
yeah, that,
It's all like, I remember it's all vowels. It's like OOUA.
yeah.
I don't know
um
why I find that helpful.
no, it's good. The acronym remembrance is good. uh no, that uh is just a beautiful book. um and yeah, vampires, I'm excited that they're coming back. And then the
Me too.
second thing is horror westerns,
Yeah.
because that is something that I've wanted to write for a long time, and just didn't think that there was much of a market there. And there's all kinds of awesome horror
Yeah.
westerns coming out. I just finished Zach Rosenberg's The Hunger's as Old as This Land, which is so good and such a unique take, because it is like it's coming at it from a Jewish point of
Hmm.
view. Um, and it's succinct, it's written wonderfully, it's got engaging characters, it's just fun. uh so I want more of that.
Yeah, definitely. Ooh, see, you're adding more to my list. I've been rewatching a lot of stuff lately. Like I rewatched, I stand by it. The escape room movies are fun. And I
I
feel like
haven't seen
people
those.
roll their eyes at them because they are PG-13. They are a good time. They are baby Saw, and that's okay. Um, but I also rewatched The Black Coat's Daughter, which I think when people talk about A24 films is not one that gets mentioned a lot, but it's one that I really like. And I know
Mm,
it's a very slow burn, so it is not for everyone. But I rewatched it and I was just like, still love it.
mm-hmm. I love slow burn stuff.
Yeah. And just great performances from Kiernan Shipka and Emma Roberts. And it was one of those movies where I went back into it and I remember thinking like, oh, I kind of thought that like this, and I remember and I rewatched it and realized, oh no, like you are led to believe like this is going to
Mm,
turn out this way, but actually this happens. It's just one I really liked. So I think that's on Max. I think the escape room
okay.
movie was on Hulu. Also, I like the sequel too. The sequel I might actually like the sequel more, but the first one is
Ooh,
still pretty fun. They're both just fun.
okay. Yeah, I haven't seen any of the escape room movies. I have not seen any of the Saw movies either. I just, there is a part of me that cannot handle the idea of being trapped in a place with that body mutilation, and I just like, I know I can't handle it, so I just don't watch those kinds of things. And for, they're scary, they are legitimately scary.
Yeah, I get that. I've only seen the first two, and part of me is like, maybe I am a little curious, and I do want to keep going. And then part of me is like, I get it. Like this is what it is, and I think
Mhm.
these are like the best two. So maybe I should just stop. pier. So, um, the other tradition we have on this show is to ask our guests for a final girl song.
Yes, and I chose Dissolved Girl by Massive Attack for
Hmm.
mine.
So, did you like picture what's going on in the movie when this is playing?
Yeah, so this song has, God, I mean, it's a very like, it's got a very bass heavy background to it, so it's very trip hoppy, and it changes like maybe halfway through the song. And
Mm-hmm.
the tempo really gets like awesome and fully guitar-y, and so the scene that I imagine is like there's a club and
Mm-hmm.
there's lots of flashing lights, and it's kind of bluish purple undertones, and this uh, woman is walking in and is basically going to take out the people that have been keeping her in place for a long time. Because there's all these allusions in the song to probably should have left, but now but I stayed, and it's 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 a rebellion song, I
Mm-hmm.
think. Um, so walking into a room and just like probably it's gonna sound terrible, but but yeah, just taking out some of these people who have been keeping her under, uh not letting her flourish, I guess.
I love that.
And
It's good final girl energy.
yeah, it's just like there's just something so like cathartic about that song. You
Mm-hmm.
always like you get to that part of the song where it changes tempo so drastically, and you're just like,
Mm-hmm.
yes.
All right. Well, I will add that to the playlist. Well, thank you so much for coming on here and chatting with me. Where can people find you online?
They can find me just about everywhere. I am on every social media platform, Facebook, Instagram, Threads, X, Blue Sky, TikTok. Yes, it is a lot. And
Mm-hmm.
um, and then I also have a Substack as well.
Oh, wow. That is a lot.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm sure it will prove to be too many at some point.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. I really enjoyed this.
Yeah, this was fun. Books in the Freezer is a bi weekly podcast. We post episodes every other Tuesday. You can find us on X as Books Freezer Pod. We are on Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, TikTok, honestly, all the places as Books in the Freezer. You can send us an email at booksinthefreezer@gmail.com. Show notes for this episode and all previous episodes are at booksinthefreezer.com. On the show notes, you will find a list of all of the books mentioned, and you will also find different ways that you can support the podcast, including links to the Patreon, where you can become a Patreon supporter. There is a $1, a $3, and a $5 level with all types of different perks at each tier, ranging from early episode releases to movie nights, group chats, and bonus episodes. So check that out if that sounds interesting to you. There are, of course, other ways to support the podcast that are listed on the show notes, including affiliate links and merch. But you do not have to spend any money to show your support. You can leave a review on a site like Apple Podcasts, or even just sharing about the podcast on social media. Word of mouth is huge for indie podcasts like this one. So thank you to all of you listeners who have taken the time to do that already. It means a lot. I'm Stephanie. You can find me on X as lady_Ganya. That's LADY_GAGNON, or on Instagram at that's what she read, and that's with 2 A's. And see you next time on Books in the Freezer.